In 1930s Oklahoma, Margaret Bellum is playing in a dusty field with her two daughters, Rose and Ollie. Their laughter fades into violent coughing as a thick cloud of dust suddenly engulfs the landscape. A whirlwind knocks Margaret off her feet, and she awakens, gasping, from the nightmare. Shaken, Margaret rushes to check on her daughters. At breakfast, she bows her head in prayer, pleading with God to protect them from the deadly dust storms and to keep her husband, Henry, safe as he travels for work. She also prays that her daughters don't fall ill like the other children in town. After breakfast, Rose helps her mother tend to the animals. They conserve every drop of water and grain they can. Later, Margaret visits a lonely grave under a dry, leafless tree. It's the resting place of her third daughter, Ada, who died 5 years ago. The little girl wasn't just a dream. Ollie, who is hearing impaired and communicates in sign language, gently nods when Rose asks if she remembers Ada. That night, Margaret tries to seal the cracks around their bedroom window to keep the dust out. Rose asks excitedly about her father's adventures and dreams of visiting Philadelphia. Their mother replies with little hope, saying maybe if the farm survives, they could travel in the summer. Once Margaret leaves, Rose and Ollie read a chilling tale from a book, The Legend of the Gray Man. According to the story, he once set his house on fire with his wife and 5 children inside. Though he meant to escape, the flames consumed him too. His ashes now ride the dust storms, and anyone who inhales them might become his puppet. When Ollie wonders if that's what happened to their mother when she stopped sleeping, Rose says no. It was just sadness. That night, Margaret thinks of Henry's proposal before he left. He wanted the family to come with him, but she refused to leave the house and Ada's grave behind. The next day, they visit cousins Jacob and Thomas at their Aunt Esther's house. Esther's family is suffering the same hardships. Dust covers everything, and Thomas is coughing heavily, diagnosed with pneumonia from breathing in the dust. Esther assures Margaret that it's not contagious. As days pass, Margaret begins taking sleeping pills again, unable to shake the nightmares. Her only social relief comes from quilting meetings at the church, though even there the women spread grim stories. The latest rumor, a family was murdered in their home, with no sign of a burglar escaping. Margaret is unnerved. A few days later, Esther announces they're leaving. She had a disturbing dream where she smothered Thomas to stop his cough. Margaret begs her to stay, convinced that sealing the house can keep them safe, but even she begins to doubt that now. That same afternoon, a massive dust storm rolls in. During their frantic return home, Ollie gets separated and glimpses a shadowy man in the fog. Margaret, panicked, finds her hiding in the closet, shaking and calling for her father. To comfort her, Margaret draws a countdown on the closet door, marking the days until Henry's return. When the girls mention the gray man again, Margaret takes away the book, hoping to stop Ollie's fear-driven visions. Still shaken by the story from the quilting group, Rose suggests maybe what Ollie saw was a burglar. Trying to distract them, Margaret tells their favorite story about the days when the wheat was so tall they played hide and seek in the fields. But the next morning, Rose runs in a panic. There's someone outside the window. The boards are sealed tight, but Margaret sees a strange shadow slip past the thick layers of dust. She grabs the shotgun and steps out. The barn door is open, with strange stains near it. Inside, it's empty, but through the slats, she sees a shadow moving. She kicks the door open, only to find Jacob's horse. The storm had overturned their wagon. Jacob didn't survive. Thomas was found beneath the wreckage, alive but in shock. The sheriff reports that Esther is missing. When they move Jacob's body, he's clutching a hand. Margaret pulls back the tarp, and Esther suddenly jerks upright, coughing violently. At Jacob's wake, the women try to comfort Esther, saying, God works in mysterious ways. Margaret loses patience with their empty words and lashes out. During the burial, Rose's nose begins to bleed. Margaret takes her to Dr. Cox, who blames the dry air and tells her to continue using sleeping pills. Back home, Margaret decides to sleep in the girls' room, using fabric to block the cracks. Rose reminds her they shouldn't sleep together, because of the past. Rose begs to leave. Margaret promises they will, on the next train, when Henry sends more money. But the quilting ladies bring bad news. Train service has been suspended indefinitely due to the sandstorms. They also say that in the recent house tragedy, the surviving father is now the main suspect. There was no sign of a break-in. Sometime later, Margaret scolds Rose for risking the family's only cow. When Ollie says it was the gray man, Margaret becomes furious. Moments later, she hears heavy footsteps upstairs. Apologizing for the argument, she climbs the stairs, but the girls are gone. Looking out the window, she sees them far off in the field. Terrified, Margaret grabs her shotgun and investigates the barn. She's shocked to find the girls hiding inside. They followed her out, too scared to stay alone. Suddenly, the boards beneath Ollie's feet begin to rise. A man crawls up through the floor. He says his name is Wallace Grady and claims Henry sent him, lent him his coat, even. He knows all their names and says he didn't mean to scare anyone, just needed shelter from the storm. He limps from an injured leg and says hiding was the safest choice. Margaret doesn't trust him. She tells him to leave. But when Rose's nose bleeds again, Wallace says he can help. Healing is in his hands. Margaret, rifle raised, lets him try. He places his filthy hand over Rose's face. She starts choking, but when Margaret pulls her away, the bleeding stops. Reluctantly, she lets him stay for now. He helps feed the cow and agrees to stay hidden in the barn to avoid gossip. That night, Margaret wakes to laughter. The girls are dancing in the rain. Rain, real rain, finally falls. A rare blessing. Could Wallace's healing powers be real? That night, Margaret demands Wallace return the stolen money and let go of her daughter, but he refuses. Instead, he wants the letter back, afraid she'll show it to the sheriff. Using sign language, Margaret signals Ollie to duck, then fires the shotgun. The shot misses, but it's enough of a distraction. Ollie escapes, and Wallace snatches the letter from Rose's hand, calmly burning the only evidence. He warns them, no lock can keep out the gray man when he chooses to enter. Then, with eerie calm, he disappears into the storm. That night, Margaret chooses not to take her sleeping pills. Instead, she waits outside with her shotgun, keeping watch. But exhaustion plays cruel tricks on her mind. When Ollie appears in the barn, Margaret isn't sure if she's real. Then Esther appears too, prophesying that Margaret will soon breathe in the gray man and become like her. Margaret jerks awake. Rose is shaking her, terrified. She had found her mother standing in the yard, entranced. From then on, Margaret's fear spirals. Every night she examines every speck of dust, convinced the gray man is in the air, in the house, waiting. One night, the girls' terrified screams pull her from her obsession. She rushes to their room. It's locked from the outside, but the beds inside are on fire. She douses the flames, blaming herself for not sealing the door properly. Rose doesn't understand. How could someone get in? Margaret insists. The cracks are enough. Wallace doesn't need doors. Rose tries to reason with her. The gray man isn't real. Wallace read the book while staying in the barn. He used it to scare them. But Margaret doesn't listen. Wallace healed Rose's nosebleed, didn't he? He set fire to the beds without touching a lock. That was proof. Just then, Esther arrives. She looks better, clean, calm, smiling. She says she's come to make peace. A pastor helped her recover, and she's even been visiting Thomas again. Gently, she mentions that people in town are worried. Margaret hasn't let the girls out for weeks. Margaret barely hears her. Her ears are trained on the wind, her eyes always watching the dust. But then Esther says something that lands. When she herself refused to leave the house, people began to talk. Margaret realizes, now she's the one everyone's whispering about. To prove them wrong, she decides to attend the town dance that very night. As they get ready, Rose says the sheriff will be there. Maybe he can protect them from Wallace. But Margaret warns her. The letter's gone. There's no proof. If the sheriff thinks they're in danger, he might take them away just like Thomas. Rose promises to stay quiet and tries to distract herself by playing with Ollie and the cat. In front of the mirror, Margaret rehearses her smile, her lines, trying to look normal. But when she hears Rose coughing, her mind snaps. She claws at the dress, thinking it's choking her daughter. Rose insists she was just laughing, but the moment shakes her. She says maybe they shouldn't go to the dance. Margaret doesn't answer. Instead, she quietly slices her leg with a razor, using the blood to give her cheeks color, determined to appear healthy. At the dance, her paranoia peaks. Whispers swirl. When she sees Rose talking to the sheriff, she panics, convinced her daughter is revealing everything. But before she can act, her dance partner halts mid-step and points down. The music stops. Everyone stares at the spreading red stain on her dress. She misjudged the wound. Ashamed and overwhelmed, she breaks into tears. She rushes for the door, only to find Esther arriving, arm in arm with her worst fear. But as he steps into the light, Margaret realizes something shocking. This isn't Wallace. It's Reverend Shaw. His face looks nothing like the man in the barn. Esther, concerned, offers to visit later. She even offers to bring Shaw again. He helped her when she was lost. She holds out the crucifix he gave her, promising that change is possible when we accept help. Rose almost agrees. But before she can, Margaret shouts out everything. Her accusations, her fears, her belief that Wallace can turn into dust and possess people. The sheriff listens, concerned. And now everyone else is listening too. Rose realizes the situation is out of control. So she steps forward and lies to protect her mother. She says it's true. Their father was robbed, and the man threatened them. The sheriff nods. The quilting ladies even seem to believe her. But Margaret ruins it again. She goes too far, claiming Wallace can enter people's bodies through the air. That's when the sheriff knows something's very wrong. Back at home, Margaret quietly sews the torn dress. But Rose is horrified to see she's stitching her own palm into the fabric. She asks if Wallace is inside her. When someone knocks, Margaret grabs the shotgun. Rose begs her to calm down. It might just be a friend. Margaret tells the girls to lock themselves in the bedroom, stuffing a rag under the door. She steps outside. There's no one there, just fog. Then voices, Wallace's threats, Esther's warnings, blend in the wind. A shadow appears. She fires. Nothing. Back inside, Rose checks the rag. It's been dragged. Someone opened the door. As she moves through the dark with a lantern, a shadow runs behind her. She finds her mother in the bedroom, scratching the wall and whispering to the spirit of Ada. When Margaret notices her, she sneaks away. Rose hears locks turning. The haunting, she realizes, is her own mother. She follows Margaret into the yard, begging her to put down the shotgun. But when Margaret turns around, she sees Wallace. The voice is his. The words are mocking, but it's Rose, sobbing, trying to break through. Finally, Margaret snaps out of it. But she won't accept that it's all in her head. She insists she needs to stay, close to all three daughters, Rose, Ollie, and Ada. Rose backs away, afraid. She flees inside, finds Ollie, and tells her, this isn't their mother anymore. She says Margaret has breathed in the gray man, become like him. Then she trips on Esther's dead body. The storm outside rages. Margaret says there's nowhere left to run. As Rose tries to escape, Margaret pulls her back. The sheriff pounds on the door. Rose screams for help. Ollie watches as their mother grips Rose too tightly. The girls exchange glances, signing silently. Then Ollie opens the door and lets the sheriff in. He tells the girls to wait in the living room. Margaret plays calm, says the shotgun was for coyotes. But when asked about Esther, she grows defensive. The sheriff decides it's best to take the girls until Henry returns. Margaret starts to cry, then lunges and slashes him with a razor. The girls panic. The storm is too strong to flee. Rose grabs the razor, but can't bring herself to use it. Margaret says there's only one way to keep the family together now. They should all take the sleeping pills and join Ada. Rose pretends to agree, asks her to mix the medicine with fruit. Margaret heads to the kitchen. Suddenly, a loud bang. Rose runs in. Ollie's gone, she yells. Margaret ties a rope to the doorknob, stepping into the storm to find her. As she disappears into the dust, Rose does the hardest thing she's ever done. She cuts the rope. Margaret is lost, wandering into nothingness. Ollie was never outside. She was hiding behind the door. The next morning, the train pulls away from the station. Inside, Rose and Ollie sit together, finally heading toward a new life, leaving the dust, the fear, and the gray man behind. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.